Hello and welcome to a second installment of Iyun with Benzion, Xagiga, Daf Gimel, number 3. Last time in Daf Beis, we started talking about this Chiluk the Gemara makes, the difference between the mitzvah of Olas Ra'iya and the mitzvah of Shalmi Simcha. These are two different types of karbonos you have to bring when you come to the regal on Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot. You have to bring a korban olas Ra'iya, which is a korban ola, which goes all the shamayim, and Shalmi Simcha, which is a korban shlamim, which the bailam get to eat a substantial part of in order to make mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. Enach Simcha ela basar v'yayin, as the Gemara Pesachim says, to eat the Shalmi Simcha. So the Gemara notes there's a difference between them. Now, when it comes to mitzvah Shalmi Simcha, in order to be exempt from the mitzvah Shalmi Simcha, you have to be a complete cherish. You have to be a cherish that is similar to shota and a katan. A cherish that can't hear and can't speak, a complete deaf, which is the common way of understanding a cherish in all of Shas. But when it comes to Olas Ra'iya, there's a special dispensation, a special exemption, that even if you just can't hear, but you could speak, or you can't speak, but you can hear, even if you only have one deficiency, you're already exempt from Olas Ra'iya. Why is that the case? So we're trying to venture into why that should be. Now the Gemara really gives a concrete answer, and the Gemara on Daf Gimel asks this exact question: what's the difference? The Gemara answers that we learn from Hakel, because of Gzera Shava of Ra'iya. Just like by Hakel, it says Laman Yishmu, Laman Yilamedu. The Maskana of the Gemara is Laman Yilamedu. We pronounce it Yilamedu. So Laman Yishmu by Hakel comes to teach me that you have to be able to hear, even if you could speak, but you can't hear. It's a special thing. Goes out of its way to say that even if you could speak, you can't hear. You're already patur from Hakel, and by extension, you're patur from Olas Ra'iya, because the Gzera Shava Ra'iya, Laman Yilamedu, teaches me you have to be able to teach other people, and if you can't speak, you can't teach other people in a successful way. So therefore, even if you can't speak, even if you could hear but you can't speak, you already be patur from Hakel, and by extension, Olas Ra'iya. That's the Gemara. Now, I want to. We talked about why that's the difference should be. We talked about that the concept of the cheresh of a katan, and the reason they're pater and mitzvos, I want to suggest is that they're bleed das. That's the Gemara says in a lot of places. They don't have das. They don't have recognition of what they're doing. I wanted to make it dependent on mitzvos shrichas kavana. Mitzvos generally we paskin, at least midoraisa. Mitzvos need cognizance. You have to know what you're doing. You have to intend for the mitzvah. And someone who's a shota of a katan, he's psychiatric, or he's a katan, he's a minor, or he's a cherish, he's a dumb person, and he can't understand what he's doing, so he can't perform a mitzvah. So we're trying to use that to explain Rashi, because that's where it all comes back to Rashi on Daf Beis Amud Aleph. First Rashi in the Masechta says by Olas Ra'iya. He says the mitzvah of Olas Ra'iya is to appear in the Azara. It doesn't say with a korban to bring a korban. It's to be physical presence in the Azara. So Tosos Rav Chanan and Tosos asks on, not Rav Chanan was, Tosos Rav Chanan asks on Rashi. He says it's not feasible. The Ikar mitzvah is bringing the korban, not being present in the Beis Hamikdash. We're trying to defend Rashi. So basically, we're left with the Gemara's distinction. The Gemara links it to Hakel, and from Hakel you see that Olas Ra'iya. Now, I'll try to understand it a little more in depth. This, I think, is going to open it up more clearly based on the following question. The Gemara then says that someone who's Ozneim, it says by Hakel, you have to hear it in both ears. Ozneim is plural, both ears. The Gemara learns, Rav Tanchum learns, on the Olam Aleph in the middle, Cherish ba'ozna achas pater min Ra'iya. Not only are you pater from Ra'iya if you can't hear, but even if you can hear in one ear, right? You can hear in the other ear. For most intended purposes, hearing in one ear is good enough, right? People put the AirPod in one ear. They could hear in one ear. That's good enough. One ear, you don't need both ears. You can hear very well with one ear. Still, you're pater from Ra'iya. And then the Gemara, at the end of the Gemara, says the Gemara said you could use Be'oz Nayim for that. You need Be'oz Nayim to teach me. It has to be heard by all of Klal Yisrael. All of Klal Yisrael has to hear Hakel. And the Gemara answers, Ahu, the last verse of the Gemara says, Ahu milaman yishmu nafka. That all of Klal Yisrael has to hear is learned out Laman Yishmu. So Tosos Marsha, the footnote number 24, asks, how could that be? How can we learn that Laman Yishmu teaching me has to be learned all Klal Yisrael? The Gemara already learned early in the daf, Laman Yishmu was a special pasuk by Hakel to teach me that even if you're just deficient in hearing, but you can speak, you're still, even though normally mitzvahs, you're only patur from them if you both can't hear and you can't speak. By Hakel and also Olas Rahiya, even if you just can't hear, that's good enough to patur you, to exempt you from Hakel and Olas Rahiya. So how could it be? How can you learn both things from the same thing? That's the question the Mefarshim have to deal with. I want to suggest over here, based on this explanation and based on Rashi, we can answer all these questions with one fell swoop, like this, that there's two types of chiyuvim in the Torah. There's a chiyuv on the gavra, on the goof of the person, on the gavra, let's say the gavra, the goof of the person. And there's a chiyuv on the maisa, that person has to do a maisa, has to do an action. So if we learn like Rashi that the mitzvah of Olas Rahiya is to be present in the Azara, what are we going to do with the fact that korban? You do have to bring a korban. That could either be a lechatchila or it could be a t'nai in the mitzvah, but it's not the ikar part of the mitzvah. And we'll see the nafkamina in a second. So the mitzvah is to be present. There's a mitzvah on the goof of the person. So when it comes to hearing, there's two different ways of looking at hearing, right? Hearing is it's an action. When someone says something, you hear what he says. It's an action. It's a receptive type of action. You don't do something. It's a receiving, but you could put your ear to something to hear it. And then there's the physical presence of the ability to hear, And something like nafkamina between these two things is, for example, let's say you have one ear, but you could hear, right? So you don't have the receptacles of hearing. You don't have a normal receptacles of hearing. You don't have a goof that has usnayim, that has receptacles of hearing. But you technically could hear because you have one ear. You could hear, or you have both ears, but you need a hearing aid to hear with. So technically, in your goof, your shalom, you have two usnayim, but you're using a hearing aid, so you really can't hear in one ear. So, what is the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah the maisa of receiving sound in your ear, or is the mitzvah just be present with the ability to hear, the ability or the maisa, and the ability is really totally in the physical presence of your body, your goof. I want to say that's exactly what the Gemara is saying over here. The Gemara is saying Bozneim, Hakel, and applies to the Gzera Shava Rahiya to Olas Rahiya also, is that like Rashi says, the mitzvah is to be present. It's a mitzvah on the goof, Olas Rahiya. It's a din l'chachila to bring a korban or a t'nai, but one of the stipulations. But the main part of the mitzvah is to be present. It's on your goof. Therefore, if you're cherish be'ozen echad, you can't hear in one ear, you're already going to be patur because there's a deficiency in your goof. Right? For example, let's say one person didn't have an ear, like this guy Vincent Van Gogh. He chopped off his ear at the end of his life. You can't hear in one ear, so you mutilate your ear. So there's a deficiency in your goof. But technically, could you hear? Yeah, you could hear. So that's the chiddush of Rashi, that it's a fundamental, and this comes out through the Gemara. And the Gemara says Hakel is linked to Olas Rahiya, which is different than Shalom Simcha. Shalom Simcha, the mitzvah is to eat the basar, to ultimately bring the korbanos, to eat the meat, and that is a maisa, that is an action that a person has to do, and that is totally in the regular column of cheresh shota v'katan. Someone who's considered a cheresh, only someone who's considered a cheresh is considered someone who is a complete dumb person, a mute, a person who can't speak and he can't hear because he lacks das to do a maisa. You only have to have kavana. This is kavana when you're doing a maisa, when you're doing a halachic action. You're doing a halachic action, and then you have to be fully there, fully present in your mind, in your das, in your kavana. But the mitzvah Olas Rahiya is a different mitzvah. We'll learn that of Hakel. We're going to learn also, we're going to say, by extension, we can say that Hakel, also the mitzvah, is to be physically present when the Melech is reading the Torah. And that's Ba'oznehem. Therefore, it says, if you're even L'cheresh Be'ozen Achad, let's say you only have one ear, you only have physically one ear, you're going to be patur from that. And really, when the Gemara says that we learn out of the whole by Hakel that all of Klal Yisrael has to be there hearing from the Yishmu, that's really telling me that it's a mitzvah. The chiddush of there is to tell me it's exactly the same thing as what we learned earlier. The Yishmu to tell me that the mitzvah of Hakel, the mitzvah of Rahiya, of Olas Rahiya, is that you have the ability to hear. It's not that it's being present, and being present means you have a body that has the ability to hear, not actually hearing. So that's why Laman Yishmu is teaching me that all of Klal Yisrael has to hear. All they have to do is have the ability to hear. So that's all it's saying. So really, and it's a limitation. All Klal Yisrael has to be there. They have to have the ability to hear. But if something got in the way, you know when this happened, if something got in the way and they couldn't hear momentarily, that's not a psul in their hearing because they technically were present. They had the ability to hear. It's not totally in the actual maisa of them hearing. And that's why ba'ozen achas, if you have one ear, you'd be deficient, you'd be patur from the mitzvah because you have to be physically present there with two ears. So the nafkamina would be, for example, if if your ear was mutilated or you didn't have the ability to hear in one ear, you'd be patur, even though technically you could hear, even though you heard it, even though you could hear. And similarly, by extension, other places by cheresh, if, like for example, Shalmi Simcha, if you technically were deaf, but you had hearing aids that made it louder for you, you really couldn't hear an audible sound, but the hearing aids would help you. So then you wouldn't be patur because it's the maisa of hearing. That's the mitzvah. Most mitzvahs are telling the maisa, the ability to hear, the ability to have kavanah, to have das. So if you could hear physically the maisa, you could receive audible sounds. So you'd be chayav in the mitzvah. Hasha'enke, when it comes to hakel and olus ra'iya, the mitzvah has nothing to do with the ability, with the actual physical hearing, but rather the ability to hear. And really, it's all the same thing. Laman Yishmu was teaching me about all of Klal Yisrael. They have to be there. They all have to physically be there and be present and be able to hear, which is what the Gemara said earlier. That hearing, because that even if you just can't hear, even if you could speak, it's because of the physical limitations that you can't hear. Nothing to do with the level of das, which in order to remove the level of das, you have to not be able to hear and not be able to speak. Here, even if you physically can't hear, it's deficiency in your goof, in your body, and you're not considered someone who's fit for the Olas, Rahiya, or for Hakel. I hope you enjoyed. A little long today.